Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that affects absolutely everyone, the food we eat. Or, maybe more accurately, the stuff that looks like food.
Yeah, it's become incredibly complicated, hasn't it? We're surrounded by this just overwhelming number of choices.
Exactly. It feels engineered. Are we eating to live, or are we just fueling a massive corporate machine? That's what we're exploring in this deep dive, the calories of confusion.
It's a really critical topic
Yeah.
because the food environment, the one you navigate every day, it's heavily manipulated.
So our mission today.
It's to unpack how this aggressive marketing combined with this almost unbelievable overabundance of ultra-processed foods really messes with our health and our ability to make good choices.
And not just how it happens, but why. We need to dig into the political side, the economics behind it all.
Precisely. The forces that built this system.
Yeah.
And why maybe individual willpower isn't enough. Why we need to think bigger systemically.
Okay, so let's start with this idea. Michael Pollan talks about the American paradox. It's fascinating.
It really is.
We, as a culture, seem obsessed with nutrition, right? We talk about nutrients, vitamins, protein grams, net carbs, all that stuff. We've swapped real food for, like, a science project on our plates.
And the paradox is,
The more we worry about all those individual nutrients, the less healthy we actually seem to get as a nation. It's completely counterintuitive.
that really hits the nail on the head. That's the confusion we're talking about. And a big part of it is that so much of what's out there isn't really food in the traditional sense.
Pollan calls them edible food-like substances.
Exactly. Products of food science.
Yeah.
Engineered for shelf life, for profit, and crucially, engineered to make us want more. They're designed to be hyper-palatable.
And the packaging. It often shouts about health benefits, doesn't it? Low fat, good source of fiber, added vitamins.
Which, ironically, is often the first sign. It's probably not a whole healthy food. It means they processed the good stuff out and had to, chemically add something back in.
You see it right there in the supermarket. You walk down an aisle, and there's this feeling of incredible choice, right? Freedom, abundance.
But look closer. You might have, 50 different kinds of sugary breakfast cereal. All brightly colored boxes, mostly variations of corn, wheat, sugar.
Yeah.
And then you look over at the actual fruit section. How many types of apples are there? Maybe 5? 6, if you're lucky.
Gala, Fuji, Honeycrisp, maybe a Granny Smith.
Right. The abundance is skewed. It's an abundance of processing, of branding, not necessarily of real diverse nutrition. It serves industry, not necessarily us.
It's like the menu's been written by corporations, not by nature, or, what's actually good for us.
And that leads straight into the next big piece. This engineered abundance relies heavily on marketing, constant aggressive marketing, to maintain this illusion of choice.
Raj Patel had a really sharp take on this. He basically says this whole idea that freedom of choice in the market will fix things like hunger and obesity, it's actually part of the problem.
How so?
Because it puts all the blame on the individual consumer. Make better choices. But, Patel argues, the choices themselves are rigged. The whole environment pushes us towards the unhealthy options.
It's overwhelming. The sheer volume is paralyzing. Think about that breakfast cereal aisle again. It's a key battleground for marketers, especially targeting kids.
Oh, absolutely. The cartoon characters, the bright colors.
There was a study in the UK, quite revealing. They looked at 28 breakfast cereals, specifically marketed to children.
And the results, let me guess, not great.
Not great is an understatement. 27 out of the 28 had more sugar than the government recommended for kids.
27 out of 28.
And it gets worse. 9 of them, nearly a third, were 40% sugar by weight.
40%. Just pure sugar, practically. For breakfast.
Exactly. That's not setting anyone up for a healthy day. And when you see obesity rates rising, like 8.5% of 6-year-olds, over 10% of 15-year-olds in the UK being obese, well, it's hard not to connect the dots.
Yeah. When the everyday options are basically sugar delivery systems pushed relentlessly, especially at kids, talking about personal responsibility feels a bit hollow.
Which brings us to the ethics of it all. Mary Nesley's done a lot of work here. She points out that, legally speaking, these marketing strategies are often perfectly fine. Standard business practice.
But legal doesn't always mean ethical, right? Especially when public health is on the line.
That's the tension. These companies spend billions on advertising. TV, online, sometimes even in schools, subtly influencing choices.
And there's that weird regulatory gap I read about between the FTC and the FDA. That seems crucial.
It really is. It creates so much ambiguity. Explain that bit.
Well, as I understand it, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, they regulate advertising. They allow companies to make certain health claims in ads.
Right, general claims.
But the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they regulate the actual product label, and they're much stricter. They wouldn't allow some of those same claims on the box itself.
Exactly. So the FTC focuses on whether the advertising is broadly truthful, not necessarily deceptive. The FDA focuses on specific, verifiable nutrient facts on the package.
So you can have an ad campaign talking vaguely about, I don't know, boosting your vitality or something.
Supporting heart health.
Yeah.
All that fuzzy language.
But you couldn't legally print that same claim next to the nutrition facts panel because it's not specific or scientifically proven in the way the FDA requires.
Precisely. It allows companies to sell an idea or an emotion in their big budget ads, creating this health halo around products that nutritionally might be pretty poor. The label might tell a different, more complicated story if people can even decipher it.
It feels like a deliberate exploitation of a loophole, and only the big players have the legal teams to navigate this complex landscape.
Absolutely. It reinforces their dominance. And that dominance isn't just about marketing budgets. It's about lobbying, too.
Ah, yes. The influencing game in Washington.
We can't ignore it. The food industry spends enormous amounts of money lobbying Congress, lobbying federal agencies like the USDA, HHS, even the White House.
Trying to shape the rules in their favor.
It's a direct effort. Lobbying plus huge PR campaigns to maintain a positive public image and fight off regulations like stricter labeling laws or taxes on sugary drinks that might hurt profits.
Money translating into political influence, it raises serious questions about whose interests are really being served.
There's a classic case study that shows this corporate power and maybe hubris. Olestra. Remember Olestra?
Vaguely. The fat substitute from Procter & Gamble.
That's the one. P&G poured billions of dollars and years of research into it. The promise was huge. Enjoy your fatty snacks like potato chips, but without the fat calories.
Sounds like the Holy Grail, right?
It did, but the reality was messy. Despite all P&G's efforts to prove it worked, the evidence just wasn't there. It didn't really seem to help people reduce overall calorie intake.
Sure.
Well, there's something called compensatory eating. People figured, oh, I'm having the low-fat chips so I could have extra dip, or they just ate more later. Some studies suggested people might even eat more salty snacks because the fat substitute was less satisfying.
So, a massive scientific gamble that didn't pay off for public health.
Pretty much. Plus, there were those unpleasant digestive side effects people reported.
Right, I remember hearing about those.
So Nifley described the whole Olestra venture, considering the existing food surplus and the lack of clear health benefits, as an astonishing waste of human, land, food, and economic resources. It was about creating a profitable technological fix, not addressing the root issues of diet.
It shows the limits of trying to engineer our way out of bad habits when the system encourages them. But let's zoom out again. Think about a brand that became more than just a product, Coca-Cola.
Ah, Coke. The ultimate global brand. Its rise mirrors America's rise as a global superpower, almost perfectly.
It's everywhere.
And to its critics, it represents more than just a drink. It symbolizes, as Tom Standage puts it, ruthless global capitalism, the hegemony of global corporations and brands, and the dilution of local cultures.
Wow, that's a heavy weight for a soda to carry.
But it shows the power of branding. Coke isn't just sold, it's embedded in culture worldwide. It makes a highly processed, sugary drink seem normal, essential, even aspirational.
Okay, so to really get why we're drowning in these processed foods, we have to go deeper than just marketing. We need to look at the history, the economics, the structure that produces cheap ingredients.
Absolutely. This isn't new. The foundation for cheap calories was laid centuries ago. And it starts, really, with sugar.
The original cheap calorie commodity.
And its history is dark. Think about Columbus. On his second voyage in 1493, he brings sugarcane to Hispaniola. He sees immediately it could be incredibly profitable.
But sugarcane is hard work to grow and process.
Extremely labor-intensive. And Columbus noted right away that the local Taino people, quote, need only to be given orders to be made to work. That observation set the stage.
For forced labor?
For forced labor, and then very quickly, for the transatlantic slave trade to power the sugar plantations. This created what historians call sugar despotisms, entire economies built around producing this one commodity at immense human cost.
So the drive for cheap sugar literally built colonial economies and fueled slavery.
It was foundational. And this link between commodities, profit, and politics continued. Jump forward to the 1700s, colonial America.
What happened then?
New England distillers were importing cheap molasses from the French Caribbean. Why? to make rum.
Okay.
And that rum wasn't just for local taverns. It became a key currency in the slave trade triangle, traded for enslaved Africans on the West African coast. Some distillers even made a special extra strong version just for that purpose.
So the demand for a cheap commodity input molasses was directly financing the slave trade.
Directly. And this angered the British sugar planters in places like Barbados. Their molasses was more expensive due to British trade rules. They saw the French competition as undermining their profits.
So they complained.
They lobbied Parliament hard. And they got the Molasses Act of 1733 passed, putting taxes on foreign molasses to try and force the colonists to buy British.
Another example of commodity politics shaping policy and causing friction that would later boil over.
Exactly. Fast forward again, past World War II. Now we see the industrialization of agriculture take off, built on a few key commodities. This is the Green Revolution era.
Right, focused on boosting yields.
Massively.
Yeah.
Post-war agricultural policy, heavily pushed by the U.S. and international groups, prioritized developing high-yield varieties of just a few cereal crops: maize, corn, rice, and wheat.
And the yields did go up dramatically.
Oh, incredibly. Maize production worldwide more than doubled between the early 60s and the mid-2010s, a huge increase in sheer volume.
But there was a catch, wasn't there?
A big one. These new miracle seeds only performed well with massive inputs. They were specifically bred to respond to huge amounts of artificial nitrogen fertilizer and chemical pesticides.
So it wasn't just the seeds, it was the whole chemical package.
Yes. And while supporters say the Green Revolution fed billions, critics argue it had major downsides. It undermined traditional, diverse farming systems. It made farmers dependent on expensive chemicals, often from big corporations.
And maybe benefited wealthy countries and agribusiness more than small farmers in developing nations.
That's a central critique. It pushed a one-size-fits-all industrial model, reliant on fossil fuels and chemicals across the globe.
And this industrial model, this reliance on inputs, hinges on one massive technological breakthrough from the early 20th century: the Haber-Bosch process, synthesizing nitrogen.
This is arguably one of the most impactful inventions ever, maybe the most impactful for human population growth in agriculture.
Explain it simply. What did it do?
It found a way to take nitrogen, which is abundant in the air, but mostly inert, and force it to react with hydrogen under intense heat and pressure to create ammonia synthetic fertilizer. It was first developed, by the way, to make explosives for Germany in World War I.
Wow, so its origins are in warfare.
Yes. But its impact on farming was revolutionary. It essentially liberated agriculture, as Kristen Olson puts it, from the natural cycles of soil fertility.
Meaning farmers didn't need manure or crop rotation or letting fields rest anymore?
Not in the same way. Before Haber-Bosch, maintaining nitrogen in the soil required deep biological knowledge and careful management. Afterwards, you could just buy a bag of synthetic nitrogen.
Just throw that stuff out there, as one farmer said.
Exactly. Even on degraded land, you could get a crop. This enabled continuous monocropping of corn, soy, wheat, the building blocks of processed food on an unprecedented scale, fueled by cheap artificial fertility.
But Francis Moore Lappé argues this cheap food isn't really cheap at all. The price tag is deceptive.
Completely deceptive. Because it ignores the massive hidden subsidies, the external costs.
Like what?
Like environmental damage. Lappé points out that for every bushel of corn grown in Iowa using these industrial methods, about 2 bushels of precious topsoil are washed away. That's irreplaceable.
And the chemical runoff.
Huge costs there, too. Cleaning up polluted rivers and groundwater, dealing with algal blooms in places like the Gulf of Mexico caused by fertilizer runoff. Who pays for that?
The taxpayer. Us.
Right. We subsidize the environmental cleanup, which allows the artificially low price of industrially produced corn or meat to persist, encouraging more consumption. It's a vicious cycle.
And it's not just environmental costs. There's economic concentration, too. Lappé mentioned monopoly power in food processing.
Yes, this system breeds consolidation. A few giant companies control key parts of the chain seeds, processing plants like slaughterhouses or mills, distribution.
How does that hurt consumers?
Well, fewer buyers for farmers' raw goods means those companies can push down the prices they pay to farmers. Then, controlling the processing and retail end allows them to inflate the prices we pay at the supermarket. Lappé estimated this costs Americans nearly $20 billion a year in overcharges.
So the market structure itself squeezes farmers and overcharges consumers, benefiting the middlemen.
That's the dynamic. And you see this consolidation everywhere. Look at dairy farming.
The example was startling.
Between 1987 and 2012, the average or midpoint size of a U.S. dairy farm went from 80 cows to over 1,000 cows.
Wow, more than a tenfold increase in scale.
It takes huge capital now. Small farms just get squeezed out. Power concentrates in fewer, much larger hands. That shapes the whole food system. #Hag5E. The social and health consequences of the system.
Okay, so we have this industrial logic, built over centuries, prioritizing cheap commodity production, powered by chemicals, consolidated in few hands. And it's created what some call a societal eating disorder.
That's a powerful way to put it. The system is set up so that the most profitable things to produce and sell heavily processed foods made from that cheap corn, soy, wheat, sugar are often the least nourishing.
And the consequences are stark. For our health, for the planet.
Let's look at meat consumption. It's exploded, largely because we can produce cheap grain to feed animals.
What are the numbers?
Global meat consumption went from about 50 million tons in 1950 to 280 million tons in 2010. That's more than a five-fold increase.
That's just astronomical. And feeding all those animals takes a huge toll, right?
A tremendous toll. Globally, animal agriculture uses about 756 million tons of grain and corn each year. Plus, nearly all the world's soy crop, 98%, goes to animal feed.
So we're growing food to feed animals, often inefficiently, instead of feeding people directly.
Yes, there's a huge loss of energy in that conversion. And it dries up the price of basic grains, making staple foods more expensive for the world's poorest people who rely on them.
And the environmental footprint is massive. We touched on emissions.
It's critical to underscore this. When you account for everything land use change, methane from livestock, transportation, fertilizer production for feed crops, the livestock sector is responsible for about 18% of all global greenhouse gas emissions.
18%, that's more than.
More than the entire global transportation sector combined. All the cars, trucks, planes, and ships.
Okay, stop. That statistic is genuinely shocking. Raising livestock for food contributes more to climate change than all of global transport.
That's what the comprehensive studies indicate. It reframes the whole discussion about sustainable diets, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And beyond climate, these massive factory farms pose other risks.
Biological risks. Concentrating thousands, sometimes millions, of genetically similar animals in close quarters is a perfect breeding ground for new diseases. Pathogens can evolve and spread incredibly fast.
Like swine flu.
Exactly. Jonathan Safran Foer pointed out that the primary ancestor of the H1N1 swine flu virus, which caused a global pandemic scare, originated in a massive hog factory farm operation in North Carolina. It's a direct link between industrial farming methods and global health threats.
Okay, so we see the global scale impacts, but how does this play out differently in specific communities? You mentioned food geographies and inequality.
Yeah, this system doesn't impact everyone equally. Access to healthy food, or the lack thereof, often maps onto existing racial and economic inequalities.
So.
Research, like Ashante Reese's work in Washington, D.C., shows how food retailers and institutions have historically disinvested from Black neighborhoods. Residents in places like Ward 7 are very aware of this. They talk about the poor quality of the few stores they have, the lack of fresh options compared to wealthier, whiter areas.
People often say, well, if they have a car, they can just drive to a better supermarket.
But it's not that simple. Reese found that even for residents with cars, it's a major burden. There's the cost of gas, the extra time spent in traffic, the stress of having to leave your own neighborhood just to get decent groceries.
It makes healthy eating a logistical and financial challenge.
Exactly. It reinforces reliance on the corner stores or fast food places nearby, which mostly sell those cheap, ultra-processed options. Access becomes a real barrier.
And behind the cheap price tags on our food, there's often hidden human costs, too. The labor involved.
Absolutely invisible to most consumers. Think about tomato pickers in Florida, as documented by Barry Estabrook.
What are the conditions like?
Brutal. The main job requirement, having a back strong enough to be bent double for 10, 12 hours a day in scorching heat. And they're paid by the bucket, usually a 32-pound bucket. Intense pressure to pick fast.
Paid by volume, not by hour.
Right. And the system incentivizes speed above all else. Workers get penalized for being too slow. But Estabrook notes there's no penalty whatsoever for being too rough, with the tomatoes themselves, which are picked green and hard specifically to withstand this rough handling and long-distance shipping.
The system prioritizes the commodity's durability over the worker's well-being.
Completely. It treats the human laborer as disposable, just another input cost to be minimized in the pursuit of cheap produce.
And this vulnerability exists in other sectors, too, like dairy workers.
Yes, Sarah Mayer studied undocumented workers on Vermont dairy farms. They provide essential labor, keeping the farms running,
Mm.
but they live under constant fear.
Fear of deportation.
Exactly. She calls it a regime of deportability.
Mm.
It creates these psychological borders. Workers feel isolated, afraid to speak up about poor conditions, afraid to seek health care, constantly worried about being separated from their families. Their vulnerability keeps labor costs down, contributing to the relatively low price of milk. So if the whole system, history, economics, policy, marketing, is geared towards these large-scale, processed, often exploitative models, how do we even begin to push back? How do we find a path to dietary sanity?
Well, first, it seems we have to recognize how the rules themselves can be stacked against alternatives. You mentioned regulations hindering small producers.
It's a huge issue. Joel Salatin talks about this passionately. Small farmers trying to sell local pasture-raised meat or eggs often face what he calls hostile harassment from inspectors.
Why? Aren't regulations supposed to ensure safety?
They are. But regulations designed for giant industrial slaughterhouses, for example, can be completely inappropriate and prohibitively expensive for a small farm processing a few animals locally. They often treat small producers as guilty until proven innocent, effectively locking them out of the market.
Even though their products might actually be healthier.
That's the irony. Salatin points to real nutritional differences. Pastured eggs from hens raised outdoors can have dramatically higher levels of B vitamins, vitamin E, omega-3s, and beneficial fats like CLA compared to standard industrial battery cage eggs.
So the system makes it harder to sell the more nutritious product.
Often, yes. It favors the uniformity and scale of the industrial model, even if that model produces a nutritionally inferior product derived from less ethical or sustainable practices.
Okay, so that suggests simply trying to buy better as an individual consumer might not be enough if the options are limited. Raj Patel was critical of things like fair trade labels for this reason.
Right. He sees them as potentially valuable, but ultimately limited. A thin patch, he calls it, on a fundamentally broken system.
Meaning?
Meaning, fair trade might offer a slightly better price to some producers, which is good, but it doesn't change the underlying commodity markets, the power of processors, the dominance of supermarkets, or the marketing machine that drives overall consumption patterns. It's tinkering at the edges.
So real change needs to be deeper. Political.
That's the argument. It requires challenging the political and economic structures themselves. This is where Marion Nessel's work comes back in. She emphasizes the need for government and public health bodies to actively counter corporate influence.
Not just educating consumers, but regulating the industry.
Yes. Pushing for systemic interventions, things like stricter marketing rules, especially for kids, clear front-of-package labeling that's easy to understand, maybe taxes on unhealthy products, subsidies for healthier farming practices.
It's about changing the environment, not just relying on individual willpower.
And maybe the most fundamental systemic change starts literally from the ground up, with the soil.
That's the promise of agroecology. It's presented as the alternative paradigm to the Green Revolution's industrial model. How does agroecology work differently?
Instead of imposing a uniform system with maximum chemical inputs, agroecology is about working with local ecosystems. It emphasizes biodiversity, building soil health naturally, matching crops to the local environment, and integrating traditional farming knowledge with ecological science.
So less reliance on chemicals, more focus on the specific place.
Exactly. Developing deep local expertise. Advocates argue it can feed the world sustainably, build resilience to climate change, and empower local communities, rather than concentrating power in multinational corporations.
And is there evidence it actually works? Can it rebuild damaged soil?
The results can be incredibly dramatic. Kristen Olson highlights examples where farmers switch to regenerative practices, like using diverse cover crops instead of leaving soil bare.
What happened?
In just a couple of years, they saw things like a 67% increase in soil organic matter that's crucial for fertility and carbon storage, and a 30% increase in the soil's ability to hold water.
Wow, 67% more organic matter. That's huge for reversing degradation. And holding more water means better drought resistance.
Precisely. It shows you can actively rebuild soil health relatively quickly by working with biological processes instead of against them. It's about restoring that natural machine in the soil that cycles nutrients and sequesters carbon.
Industrial farming sort of broke that machine, or at least hampered it.
Agroecology and regenerative farming are about trying to fix it, shifting from an extractive, chemical-dependent model back towards one based on ecological health and local adaptation. It's a fundamentally different approach.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together. What we've explored today is how the average consumer, you walking into the grocery store, is basically navigating a minefield.
Like the minefield engineered for profit, an overwhelming abundance, driven by sophisticated marketing, built on cheap, industrially produced commodities like corn and sugar.
And this system didn't just appear. It has deep historical roots going back centuries to things like the sugar trade and slavery.
And then massively accelerated in the 20th century by technologies like synthetic fertilizers, born partly from wartime needs, which allowed industrial agriculture to scale up like never before.
But that scale comes with huge hidden costs. Environmental degradation, social inequality, poor public health outcomes, and often exploitative labor conditions, costs that aren't reflected on the price tag.
Exactly. So the challenge is enormous. We're up against a system that's been centuries in the making, deeply embedded in our politics and economy.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
If this shift from food primarily as sustenance towards food primarily as a source of profit really gained momentum back in 1493 with sugar, and was then solidified by 20th century industrial and military technologies.
Then what level of change do we actually need now? Is consumer education enough? Is tweaking marketing rules enough?
Or does achieving real dietary sanity, aligning our food system with the needs of both people and the planet, require a much more fundamental restructuring of our economy, our politics, and our relationship with the land itself? How deep does the intervention need to go?